Okay, so the objective here is there's been this sort of revolution in economics, which I'm going to tell you about, and many people know about it and many people don't know about it. And so I'm going to point it out and its relationship to systems. So anyway, what's involved is a major paradigm shift in our understanding of systems and systems engineering. So what happened is, Paul Romer just won, 2018 won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he did it he solved the problem, and a certain problem in economics. And to solve the problem required him to go to a paradigm shift to a post-scientific systems understanding of economics. Okay, what was the problem? The problem was growth. Okay, so turns out there's two kinds of growth. There's sort of classical growth is like land, labor, capital. I can open it up. I can clear off that land over there, and we'll put some start growing on that. And that's a growth as our society grows as we use more land, labor, capital. And then, but when we measure, if we look at the growth of society, I'll get back to the question of what is growth and how do we measure it. But when we do measure it, we find that it's growing much greater than the A-type growth can account for. So basically, our observed growth greatly exceeds the B growth. So why was B growth a problem? And it's because economics wanted to be scientific, and so, like supply demand, zero-sum game. So if it's a zero-sum game, even question how is growth possible at all? And B growth in particular is not land, it's not labor. It's like, what's this growth coming from? It's like we're getting something for nothing. So there's within classical economics, they allow for some growth, which is like more land and stuff like that. And the reason that that's possible is because as we come into the world, we haven't used all the land yet. We haven't used all the labor yet. So you're allowed to grow until you run into you don't have any more land left. Okay, so this is the limits to growth. So in the A growth type thing, limits to growth makes perfectly good sense. When I run out of resources, end of game. An analogy in cosmology is like in cosmology you start from a low entry position, and when we get to equilibrium, no more work's possible. The same sort of thing here. So they have no explanation of why we enter the world without maximum, without all this potential, without having reached the equilibrium. But we're at a non-equilibrium point, going to this equilibrium point at which no more growth is possible. So in that A growth model, what you're expecting is you approach the limit, you're going to have diminishing returns. Okay, so the rate of growth and the possibilities for growth are going to diminish as you start using up all the land, all the resources of water, whatever it is. But the empirical observation over the last couple of centuries is that we have increasing returns. As we're developing these things, actually the growth of the system, which I'll talk about, is far exceeds what we would expect from the diminishing returns then. This is A plus B growth. So in order to do this, something changed all my formatting around, but that's okay. So in order to solve this, we're going to need to have because the scientific model of economics doesn't handle this, you have to go to a post-scientific model. That's the basic, simple idea. Now, so I want to define what I mean by science here, because particularly in this group, there's a lot of different ideas of what constitutes science. And so basically a classical science, Newtonian repeatability, I can, same cause, same effect. I can take Galileo's experiment in Pisa in 1600 something. I can run that experiment here, same experiment. So it's time invariant and it's space invariant. So this idea of time, space invariant laws is fundamental. And you also have Newton's third law, action and reaction, symmetry. There's a symmetry there. Net change, zero. Okay, so there's conservation. And the general scientific hypothesis, as I call it, is that all phenomena in the universe are governed by one unified time-space invariant order. And that's what the physicists keep pushing on us generally. So I want to give science 102 is basically we move from simple Newtonian mechanics into dynamics. And in dynamics, we have these dynamic equilibrium systems, steady state models, geology, volcanoes go up and, they get water and wind wear them down. And the basic idea is that in that geological model, everything stays the same because there's sometimes things coming up, sometimes they go up, but if you look at the world, it would always look the same. And the same in economics is a supply-demand thing. You have that homeostatic stuff in biology, so forth. So the basic thing, though, is still no net change. It's conservation. Okay? So why is this B growth, excessive growth, a problem? And it's because it violates conservation. Okay? And if it violates conservation, I mean, you're not going to explain it within a scientific model. So Romer's hypothesis, his PhD thesis, is that we need to go to a post-scientific framework. Now, how is it noticed? So supply-demand, so everybody goes, oh, supply-demand, that's great. And you can have fluctuations. So a hurricane hits your economy. Whoa, we went down a little bit. So you had a pretty good year. Well, it went up a little bit. Okay, so it goes up and down a little bit. These fluctuations are okay according to, we allow that in scientific reasoning. And because these fluctuations are unpredictable, they're considered to be outside factors, external factors that are causing these fluctuations somehow. We don't know what they are, but they're not due to the economic activity itself. So what we found, though, is not just fluctuations. So in the 1800s, we started seeing this. It just kept going up and up and up and up and up. And so what's going on? So Schumpeter was one of the first. Everybody kind of sees this. It's the technologies. Okay, when I learned how to plow a field, when I use fertilizer, so forth, it's the technologies are what are allowing the economy, the growth to go up. So suggests that the B growth is actually due to technological innovations. And everybody sees, okay, yeah, it's the technology and it's innovations, and innovations are new ideas, and they're ideas about new ways of doing things. Romans call them recipes. So I find a new way of growing my crop. That's just a new way of doing things. Okay, so that's the innovations that go on. The main thing about innovations, though, is that or inventions, they're not predictable. Right? They come. If we could predict inventions, we'd have them all. We can't. They just come up sort of out of nothing. So they treated economics in the 20th century treated inventions and stuff as exogenous because they're unpredictable, just like the weather. Okay, so they're exogenous factors. Now, so Robert Solow was kind of the dominant guy, one of the dominant guys in 20th century economics, and Robert Solow, and he's got the Nobel Prize and everything too. And so he put together a scientific growth model. And so he has an A growth, the land labor said. But to account for the B growth, he just adds a function because he wants to stay mathematical. So he adds this function, which is a constant input of exogenous inventions. He doesn't really say what the inventions are. He doesn't say what they're doing. So he actually has this expression at a couple of points because they're like manna from heaven. I don't know where they come from. They're not caused by academic activity. They're coming from the outside somehow. And we'll just put that into our model. Let's add a little function in there, and that'll handle it. So it's called so the residual is the difference between the A growth and the B growth. So I can give you what the A growth is, and then you look at the actual growth, and the B growth is the actual growth. So the amount of, according to his models, as we're looking at these over time, it's not just that the B growth is exceeding the A growth, but it's actually the rate of increase of the B growth is getting greater over the last 2 centuries. So one example is in 1850, the average farmer was producing 2 bushels of corn per acre. By 1950, it was 200 bushels of corn per acre. Okay, same land, okay. And so later on, if you guys reading this, this residual is being called total production quality or something like that. You have to have fun names for it and stuff. But basically this stuff, so you can kind of see what's going on. Anyway, by the 50s, though, 85% of the observed growth was due to these exogenous technological factors. So okay, Romer 1990 comes up with the idea of endogenous technological change. So what's he done here? This is the paradigm shift. This is a major deal. So what he's doing here, he says basically no, ideas, inventions, Ideas are actually part of the economy. Ideas are a product, okay? Yes, like why would I invest in R&D? Because I want to produce ideas, okay? So that's it, and then he goes on, he says, ideas are a different type of product. Ideas are what he calls non-rivalist. So like a plow in the field, easy example. So I look at what my neighbor does and I say, he's plowing his field, oh, really good crop. You're like, hey, I'll do that too. So an idea like this, a relevant idea is, I can do it too. So the more people that use this idea, it doesn't go away. It's like if I have a cup of coffee or something, or material, anything, either I have it or you have it, I drink it, you drink it. Ideas are not like that. Ideas share around, okay? And this is one of the reasons they end up being accelerating, because if everybody in the economy can do it, so they don't diminish with use, as material things might. He really makes a big distinction between ideas and things, okay? That's the idea. So the B growth is about ideas and inventions, stuff like that, and the material growth is things, so bits and things. And so the materialist growth, the B growth, that's limits to growth narrative. And but most growth that we're measuring is not A growth. Okay, so one of the things to say, the issue says, well, it's not about how much land or gold or silicon or air or water you have, it's what you do with it. Okay. This is blueprints, innovations, designs. Okay, so he gives two examples. One is a simple one, is like Starbucks coffee. These are three sizes of drinks. They get three sizes of lids. And they sort of say, well, let's just change the geometry of the cups a little bit, and I can have three sizes of drinks in one lid. Okay, that's an innovation. And it reduces the supply chain, makes it cheaper, it's easier for them to do it, so forth. That's a small one. That's not rocket science. And he talks about RAM chips. He says, he said 10 years ago I had to pay $100 to put another a gigabyte of RAM in my computer. He said now I can do it for $10. That's the kicker. He says, and I didn't do anything. The point is that somebody else in my economic sphere solved the problem, invented something that I benefit from. Okay? So the kicker then, this is, if you like, possibly the moral issue of this thing, it's in my interest that you succeed. So I'm asking guys to solve problems. Because if you solve some of these problems that I benefit from, I sometimes call this Dawkins revelation too, because Dawkins had this selfish gene. Then finally, in the phenotype, he goes like, "Oh wait a minute, maybe I don't want to outcompete everything because in order to get along in the world, I need food and I need, he talks to the beaver dam and stuff. So all of a sudden, he realizes that Dawkins realizes, I don't think he admits it fully, but he has this revelation that he's in an ecosystem. If you like, he's in a system and that's for him to get advance, it's for the system to advance. Okay, so anyway, so it's got this, there's two parts of what I call this post-economic deal. One I want to point out is that this is moving us to a systems model. Okay, so that it's in my interest that you succeed. That's a systems concept. Okay, it's not, and the book I'm working on, it goes into, it has implications for politics, and clearly there's an implication of morality. I think that's in my interest that you succeed sounded to me when I started thinking about it, I said, that almost sounds like a golden rule or something like that. And that's moral structure. Okay, and I argue that that's it. Ultimately, the best economic structure is the best moral structure. So the other thing about this, I could point out just a couple of things that come out of this paradigm shift in post-scientific economics. One is a participant framework. Okay, so there's a kind of a paradox that everybody knows about, but they just ignore. And that is, if I'm studying, I want to know how the economic system works. I'm an economist. I'm looking at this economic system. Well, I'm assuming I'm getting functions and I do mathematical things, and so I can predict. Well, that's only possible as a deterministic system. I'm outside the system. I'm a spectator, so to speak, on that system, all right? And all of science has that kind of detached spectator thing. This goes away with quantum theory, but they don't want to admit that too much. But Dewey had this distinction between spectators and participant representations of inquiry. So if you want to be a science, David wants to have a scientific systems theory, and it's not a good idea. Because putting you outside this, it has to put you outside the system. So here's how it does, here's all the functions, here are all the great, we do all this great math, But, and the purpose of that stuff is generally to identify its description and prediction. I'm just saying, what is the purpose of science? Well, to describe the system and to predict. Well, in a participant situation, the question changes. I want to know how to work in the world. I want to know how to learn, and I want to know how to develop reality around me. Somebody had Herb Simon's comment about bringing up making the world better. Okay, so the other thing I want to say is that this B growth is evolution as well. So that what I'm describing here is how an economy grows. It's also how evolution works. Okay, so imagine now, so when I'm working with these origin of life guys, and they're going from the abiotics, so I discover these chemicals, and I get prokaryotes, and I get eukaryotes. Okay, it's the same chemicals. Okay, it's the same chemicals. There's no difference in the chemicals. They didn't invent any new chemicals. It's the same hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, so same chemicals. Okay, so it's not the chemicals itself, it's what the design, it's what they do with them. Okay, and my friend who works on eukaryotes, he points out is the eukaryotes are 200,000 times more capable of doing things in the world than prokaryotes were. Okay, and the very, very general thing is say humans, what we're doing, we're rearranging the universe. The chips now we're rearranging the universe molecule at a time. Okay, so one thing to point out is a big problem in this, but it's a very important thing, and it's called a measurement problem. Okay, inventions, new ideas are unpredictable, I say, by their very nature. It means they're logical and conceptual discontinuities. Okay, so it means that I can't, from what I know now, I can't logically reason to an invention. Okay, now for those of you who've got a little background in philosophy of science, this is Kuhn's revelation about revolutions. Okay, the Kuhnian revolutions are similar discontinuities. I think what Romer does maps on directly onto Kuhn, but I won't go into that too much. So the other argument is there's no scientific, mechanical, or logical, mathematically consistent measure. So the point is this. So if I'm going from the logical positivists wanted us to have this nice systematic, logical method of scientific method, which makes sense if the world is, static as its one order, then you should just be able to be nice and systematic. But if the order is changing and in qualitative manner, then you can't do that. So I can't, there's no way to measure, what is a measure of this progress, this B growth thing. And there's a fundamental problem in that. Because it's qualitative, there's no possible scientific measure of that. And this is an old problem. I found it I just call it the efficiency trap. The efficiency trap is to say, oh, we're just getting more and more and more efficient at producing food, right? Kind of looks like that makes sense, and to some extent you can do that, and it might be useful. This guy Nordhaus, who shared the Nobel Prize with Romer, has this example. So he's like, how many hours of work did you have to put in to produce 1,000 lumens of light? And he goes back to prehistoric man, he kind of, about 56 hours to put it together. And then you go up to candles and oil lamps and arc lamps, and you go up the and so it gets, so you look at how many hours you have to put. So now today with LEDs and stuff like that, I think the amount of work the average person, say in the United States, has to put out is like 3/100ths of a second or something like that. Ridiculous. So the point of this is 1 hour of my work now allows me to purchase, to consume, if you like, and use that consumption to produce a whole lot more than the person before. And roughly speaking, Romer's analysis is kind of difficult because of the qualitative problem. But the buying power, or the power of a person in 2000 is something like 7 times what it was in 1900. Okay, so that's that B growth. So that's the same land, same stuff. Okay. And Nordhaus in particular gets into this, he realizes this quantitative measure thing, like, oh, we're more powerful or we're more efficient, and I go, maybe, but sometimes we don't want to do that, it doesn't work. I have an example I use, I'm going to get into this. So Nordhaus talks about well-being and so forth. So the other thing that's important in this is this B growth stuff is cumulative. Okay, so cumulative ability. So all the things that that I do in the world, there's all this technology, and I came into the world, all these technologies, I didn't do it. You know, they're handed to me historically. So all these innovations have accumulated over time. And so one of the consequences of this cumulative growth is an increasing abundance. And a couple little things out of this. One, Romer's been called the first post-Malthusian economist. So the idea is that we're not in a world operating in a world of scarcity. We're actually working in a world of abundance. Right? And normal economies produce a surplus and cumulative abundance. Talks one possible parameter that talks about is increasing capacity to perform work. That's work in an engineering sense, not to do things in the world. Okay. You know, the limits to growth people, you know, they had us all starving to death by 1985, and in fact, at this point, we're throwing away, I think, 40% of the food we produce. So Romer's post-scarcity. So this really undermines, he doesn't want to say that the diminishing returns is nonsense. He says it's just still an important principle within economics. But increasing returns is the over-dominant thing. So I may run out of some particular resource, but then I need to either innovate around it, I need to do something, maybe I have to back off for a while, something like that. So, but the main thing is that we're looking for virtuous cycles of innovations. Okay, so my friend Ramiz Nam kind of captures this, and he's big into Romer. I talked to him, he's in the lecture series I put on in Psychology, and oh God, it's really great you have Romer in there. He says, yeah, it's so amazing that so many people don't know about Romer. Okay, so and the title of his book captures the idea here. It's infinite resource, the power of ideas on a finite planet. The idea is that growth is actually unlimited. If you think in terms of what you can do with the planet, our cells, and so forth, it's not the finiteness of the planet is not the limitation. It's ideas and stuff. So, and the other guy who's into this a lot, I think, is Bill McDonough, who wins all the environmentalist awards and stuff. But McDonough makes a big deal because he says, everybody wants sustainability, and so he says, like, he says sustainability is like getting up every day and asking how I can be less bad. And so what he's saying is, no, let's design for abundance. And he looks at nature and he says, we're throwing all this trash away. All that trash, we should be able to recycle that. He wrote another book called Cradle to Cradle, and about the circular economy is a big deal and stuff like that. He was very big in that stuff. So another thing he says is, this is very good because Romer does this too, and he goes like, well, see, should I design it this way or should I that way? Or, the factors that David is talking about, how do you actually, decide on which design you're going to do, because all these different values and stuff. And Romer's is very clear about it. There's no analytic answer to that. Okay? So you have to get a judgment. And McDonough's thing is, when you're in that situation, you don't really know what to do. You check in your values. And this is going back to what I was saying about the moral context of all design. That's the ultimate context of the argument. Okay. So just to emphasize that this is a systems model, and because it's in my interest that you succeed, how to work in the world, and I want to argue that the systems context is ultimately the moral context. And the second thing that comes out of this post-scientific thing is the participant framework. And what's important in this is that the economist is now inside the system. Okay, we're all economists. I used to tell my students when we come to I was teaching general philosophy, and they come to class and they say, "What are you philosophers?" Well, you're all philosophers. Really? Yeah, because you have this question. It's like, here I am in the world. I get capable, I do stuff, but I don't have any script. What am I supposed to do? Fundamental philosophical question: how should I live? Okay, so and same in this, we're participants in the system now. I say it resolves the scientific self-reference paradox because, I'm studying this deterministic system, I'm going to tell you to predict all this stuff. So what? Well, then you can go change it. Well, wait a minute. I mean, if it's a deterministic system, so there's something funny about doing science as if you're a spectator on the world. To say I'm outside the world and I'm figuring out what the laws governing this deterministic system are. But that's stupid because you're actually part of the system, so there's a contradiction there. And so if you're, when you get inside the system, then, and crucial in this is that the question changes. It's like how does the world out there work versus how to work in the world. And inquiry and ideas are inside the system. So an important part of it, this entails that whatever your view of reality is, reality has irreducible questions in it. Okay. So Romer embraces uncertainties. A lot of guys, you guys might know Brian Arthur's economics. So we get to uncertainty, then we'll run these probabilistic things and stuff. He said, no. He said the uncertainty is about discovery. The uncertainty thing is how that's we're able to learn. Okay, here I am in the world. I don't know what to do. That's cool because that tells us that we are a learning system that we can learn. If I had, like in the scientific models, a perfect competition or perfect cooperation, the catch of those things is, the actors have to have perfect information too. They have to know everything. That's stupid. Okay? But that makes the math possible. I can do the math, so I really want that. So, but for Romer, all of a sudden he says, no, we're existential agents. So here I am in the world, but I'm in script. And I'll show you something in a minute. But so I'm capable, but I have this sort of blindness. And how do I know how to? I have to learn. And so Lakatos, one of my mentors in philosophy of science, did this deal. He said, scientists don't need a theory of science in order to do science any more than fish need a theory of hydrodynamics in order to swim. So I modified that a little bit. So children don't need a theory of how to ask questions in order to ask questions any more than fish need a theory of hydrodynamics in order to swim. It's natural, it's inherent. Learning and questioning are part of the overall system. And you can take this into biology too. So, there's a great, the Europeans, when they talked about, like, here I am, and I don't know what I'm doing now. And maybe the Pope isn't the right answer. So this existential angst and crisis, who am I? I was like, So in the US, they mostly go, hey, I have all this capability and nobody's grading me. I have this creative potential. This is exciting. So, and Florian writes this great book, and he really into the understanding the philosophical foundations of realizing that one of the coolest things about engineering is this existential aspect. I don't know how to go backwards on this now. So, is that possible? Yeah, it is. So anyway, so that's okay. And it's this. I talked to a friend who's teaching engineers, and we were talking about curriculum stuff, and I said, well, engineering. There's a thing called STEM now. I know you guys a big deal on the curriculum: science, technology, engineering. Math. Engineering didn't used to be in there. It's the big E. What is engineering? Well, it's problem solving, real world problem solving. The problem is that definition, though, as my friend said, is that you don't actually know what the problem is. Okay, most of the time. Sometimes you just want to fix the refrigerator. Okay, that's kind of technical. But the thing about engineering is you don't really know what the problem is. And a very characteristic of engineering processes is that that you go into it, engineering problems, you go into it thinking you know what the problem is, but you almost always you end up saying, oh, well, that's actually not any problem, or that version of it, we can't solve it that way, so we reconceive it and do it another way. So that's very characteristic of problem solving in engineering. But my friend said, he said, I don't teach my students that they're problem solvers. He said, I teach them that they're value actualizers or opportunity manifestors or something like that. In other words, he says, you see your world, you're in a world of opportunity, okay? And in that world of opportunity, now you can be an engineer, now you can create, now you can look at things. It's a very important part of this post-scientific attitude. I somehow messed this up. So one of the things about being inside the system here is that learning, I'm a learner inside of a learning system. Okay, I'm learning about learners. They're learning about me. So what am I learning about? Well, learning ends up being, this goes back to Aristotle. One theory of learning is if the thing's stable enough, I can learn about it, I can be like as if I'm a spectator. But in a social system or in an overall, when we look at the ecosystem and stuff, I'm inside of it, it's dialectic. They call it dialectic theory of learning, which means that learning occurs through I'm learning with you. I'm not learning just about you to manipulate you. You're not learning about me to manipulate you. We're learning together in order to find something that's going to work better. So it's a creative thing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of good stuff under that big holistic term, isn't there? So we're what I call Carnot's epiphany. Carnot is just basically we're engineers in a world of engineering, or put it another. The reality is, the ontology, if you like, and the epistemology is too, is we are systems engineers in a world of system engineering. Okay? It's not just that we're engineering the world out there. An interesting thing also is just dealing with some of the Chinese. They have a thing of wu wei wu. I don't know if you guys are into the Tao. Wu wei wu means doing by not doing. What does that mean? What it means is this. They also call it field. They're calling it a field philosophy, which is very close to systems philosophy. Wu wei wu means doing by not doing. It means like, okay, the doing would be, I'm going to do you. I'm going to tell you what to do. I have this knowledge, and I'm going to fix the world. And the wu wei wu thing, so what the wisdom was no, when you go into the world to solve a problem, you're in a system of other people who are also trying to do these sort of things. So you go in and you embrace your ignorance and you listen, okay, and you work together. So, and this is the dialectics of learning, and this is an ancient old wisdom stuff. Anyway, I wanted to give a pitch to Peter Corney. You may not agree with Peter on some stuff. I don't like his latest book, but brilliant. I mean, if you want to review the field, holistic Darwinism, my God, I mean, he goes through every one of these issues and he gives you like 15 people who said important things about it, and he documents it and he evaluates it and he goes through absolutely fantastic stuff. And particularly if there's people worry about entropy, which they asked him about at his talk today, he and Steve Klein, who was an engineer at Stanford, just did some brilliant stuff on thermodynamics, which is totally underappreciated. Anyway, I mentioned Herb Simon says the same. Somebody else had it. The guy, Michael, what his name, did it. What are you trying to do as an engineer? You're trying to move from a current state of affairs to a future, more desirable state of affairs. But what's more desirable, and how do you do it? Once you get there over time, how do you know it's better? There's no way to measure that. This leads to what Romer calls meta questions, which are things like Wes Churchman. How do we design our society in order to maximize innovation and these sorts of things, and balance, and things like educational systems and so forth. Somebody says, no, how much gold do I have? And somebody's coming that when some French and German people started recognizing what was going on here, and they sold all their, both Germany and France sold all their gold and silver reserves and invested them in their universities. That's a good lesson. As we learn how to learn. And this is like guys probably all read the Harvard Business Review. This is all over Silicon Valley. The big word is innovation. How do we innovate? What's your innovation culture? When somebody comes up with a good idea within your company, how are you feeling that? Are you finding is going on? So so design is not like I think I would design a website or I'll design a chair or something like that. It's also how do I design my business? I just put it the unity of the thing, which he was looking for. I do this way. So what's the ultimate design criteria? Well, how do I design the irrigation of my fields? How do I design my house? That's architecture. How do I design my city? That's urban planning. How do I design my economy? Well, that's that's an economic question. We got patents, tariffs. How do I design a political system that's going to make all that work? Well, we're at Plato's Republic at that point. Okay, so it's philosophical. It's ongoing questions, and it's dynamic. The American Constitution is a design document. Okay, say, hey, let's design the way we're going to live on these, structures and rules and constraints and so forth. And it's supposed to be, dynamic, and then as we learn, we can do it. Okay, so that's it. UNESCO.
Quick question on the B growth. It doesn't sound like you're aiming for one sort of God particle or something. I mean, it sounds like you're happy with a mosaic or a...
B growth, first of all, B growth is innovation. Okay, innovations and ideas. It's about, and we learn how to do that. But that learning required, we're blind. To find a new way of doing things, you have to experiment, you have to explore. That's one of the kind of catches of innovation theory right now is you don't just come up with an innovation and put it out there. You come out, you have to experiment, you have to try it out. You have to, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize that consequence. Or, so as you evolve it, you're learning, and you're learning with in this Wu way too. You're in a system and you're learning within a system.
Including information. Information is, of course, cascading, it's multiplying.
Yeah, well, information is a tricky deal. This is where Peter Corney and I agree. I highly recommend you guys read the Holistic Darwinism, chapter 12, 13, 14, where he just demolishes this idea, this whole Shannon information stuff. It's just nonsense. He says, unless it has to be functional information. Is that functional information? Romer has an example where he talks about Vasco da Gama, who was the first one to notice that he's going around the world. He had 180 guys on his ship. 90 of them had died by the time he got to some tropical island, and then they started eating all this fruit, and all of a sudden it just all got better. Okay, that was an idea. There was another, I think, 150 years before the Brits figured out that putting, lime juice and stuff on their ships. So that's about vitamin C. And he says, well, that was, okay, so that was the idea. Somebody talked about the idea, the invention, the innovation, and then he says, and that has led to the whole vitamin industry. So that's just kind of waiting. So things grow on top of growing.
Yes, I had a question about abundance and the fact that abundance is supposed to be abundant and accessible as any non-rivalrous good, but the innovation in the business models have created new forms of enclosure and new forms of extraction and new forms of whatever. That means that we're still, as I understand it, back to square one, where the abundance is being canalized and is not.
No. You're thinking in terms of the materialist thing. I mean, one of the. I think everybody gets it at this point, but I mean, like 50, 75 years ago, they didn't get it. Like what was the economy? There was like that. McDonough talks about throwing things away. Well, there is no away. It's all here.
Yeah.
And that's where you get cradle to cradle and stuff. But you didn't realize that what's abundant is not necessarily the material things. Okay,
but I'm not talking
abundant is the knowledge, your ability to do things. Hegel, somebody.
No, but the ability to access water, air, the ability to access education.
Yeah, but it's not okay. Education, yes. Ideas.
The
Internet is huge abundance.
To have access well-being in a certain way. I don't really understand how. Getting to the innovation and to the abundance, actually how it connects with doing things, as you were mentioning earlier, with more systemic virtues and more systemic morality, because now we're assisting with a generation of other forms of excesses in technology that is actually depleting other things than land.
Well, it's all very dynamic, but I mean, there's, and we're going to screw up and we learn things. And I mean, this whole thing about the CO2 in the atmosphere. I mean, McDonough says, like, too much CO2 in the atmosphere? It's a design problem. And in fact,
But does Romer address my question, or?
But we already have the energy technologies and the water technologies. Yeah.